The sun was setting behind the dry red cliffs of the Comanche lands, painting the sky with strokes of orange and gold. The campfires were already burning, their smoke rising into the quiet evening air. Around them, warriors sat in silence, sharpening their spears, repairing their saddles, or telling old stories about battles and bravery. Among the prisoners taken from the last raid was a young white woman named Sarah. Her face was pale, her clothes torn from days of struggle, and her eyes filled with fear and exhaustion. She had been captured along with her infant son, a baby not more than 6 months old. The warriors had treated her roughly at first, thinking she was just another enemy woman. But as the days passed, they noticed something different about her. One evening, while the tribe prepared for their evening meal, Chief Tallhawk, the leader of the Comanche, walked through the camp inspecting the captives. He was a tall man, his face marked with years of leadership and war. His eyes were sharp, yet his steps were slow and measured. As he passed by the prisoners' tents, a faint sound caught his attention, the soft crying of a baby. Curious, he lifted the flap of one tent and stepped inside. There in the dim light, he saw Sarah sitting on the ground, holding her child close to her chest. The baby was hungry, crying weakly, and Sarah, trembling, had undone part of her dress to feed him. Her eyes widened when she saw the chief standing in the doorway. She froze, afraid that this might anger him. For a moment, silence filled the tent. The chief stood still, watching the mother and child. His expression unreadable, the sight was not one he expected. A woman, frightened yet full of love, risking everything to feed her baby even in captivity. Outside, one of the warriors whispered to another, "The chief will punish her." They believed such actions from a captive could be seen as defiance. But instead, Chief Tallhawk took a slow breath and stepped closer. He knelt beside her, his shadow falling across her face. "You feed your child," he said quietly in his deep voice. "Even among enemies, a mother's heart is the same." Sarah looked at him, confused, her lips trembling. She didn't know whether to bow her head or speak. She only whispered, "He's hungry." "I have nothing else," the chief nodded slowly, then stood, his eyes softened. "You will not be harmed," he said. "A woman who protects her child is sacred." The warriors nearby were shocked when they heard his decision. No captive woman had ever been shown such mercy before, but the chief's word was law. He ordered the guards to bring the mother extra food and water, and even allowed her to stay in a warmer tent that night. Sarah sat beside her sleeping baby and looked out at the stars through the open flap of the tent. She thought of her home far away, the life she had lost, and the strange kindness she had just seen. For the first time since her capture, she felt something that surprised her. Hope, Chief Tallhawk, meanwhile, sat near the central fire, staring into the flames. He remembered his own wife, who had died years ago while protecting their newborn during a raid. He had lost both mother and child that day. The memory still haunted him. Seeing Sarah had stirred something deep within him, a pain mixed with respect. From that moment, he made a quiet promise to himself. He would not let this woman or her child suffer as his family had. He would protect them until he decided what was right to do. Days turned into weeks, and the camp slowly accepted Sarah's presence. Some of the women even brought her blankets and shared food. The baby, once weak, began to smile again. The chief often watched from a distance, saying little but always noticing. One night, when a storm rolled over the plains, lightning flashing across the dark sky, Sarah's tent nearly collapsed from the wind. Chief Tallhawk himself came to secure it, getting drenched in the rain. When Sarah thanked him, he only said, "A child should not cry from cold," and walked away. In that moment, Sarah realized something she hadn't before. This man, feared by many, carried a heart that had known deep loss and hidden kindness. Little did she know, this unexpected act of compassion would change both their lives forever. The next morning, the Comanche camp slowly came to life under the pale light of dawn. Smoke from the dying campfires curled upward, and the sound of horses snorting mixed with the distant cry of eagles. Sarah sat outside her tent, her baby wrapped tightly against her chest. The storm from the night before had left the ground damp, and the air smelled of wet earth. Chief Tallhawk stood near his horse, watching the rising sun. His long hair was still wet from the rain, and his eyes looked heavy with thoughts. The memory of the white woman and her child still lingered in his mind. Something about them had stirred an emotion he had buried long ago. He turned when one of his men approached. It was Gray Fox, one of the younger warriors known for his fierce loyalty and quick temper. "Chief," he said, "the council wonders why you show mercy to the white woman." His tone carried both confusion and challenge. "The others think she is a bad spirit sent to weaken us." Tallhawk's gaze hardened slightly, but his voice remained calm. "A mother who feeds her child is no spirit," he replied. "She is life itself." Gray Fox bowed his head but did not fully understand. He had been raised to see enemies in all who were not Comanche. Yet the chief's words carried a weight that silenced him. Later that day, Sarah tried to help one of the older women fetch water from the stream. Her movements were slow and careful. Every step reminded her that she was far from home. The women whispered among themselves, some with pity, others with suspicion. Still, Sarah smiled gently and thanked them whenever they allowed her to assist. At noon, she saw the chief again. He was speaking with the elders beneath the shade of a large oak. When their eyes met briefly, he nodded, as if assuring her that she was still safe. For a moment, she almost forgot she was a prisoner that evening. While the tribe gathered for a meal, a group of young warriors began to mock her. One of them threw a small stone near her feet and said, "Maybe she can teach her baby to steal from our fire." Laughter broke out, but it quickly died when Tallhawk rose to his feet. He walked toward them, his steps silent yet full of power. "You shame yourselves," he said firmly. "Would you mock a mother feeding her child while you eat from the hunt?" His voice carried across the camp like thunder. The warriors lowered their heads. "In this camp, no woman or child will be dishonored," he added. Sarah heard every word. Her heart raced, and tears filled her eyes. She had never expected such protection from the man whose people had taken her captive. That night, as the moon rose high over the plains, Sarah couldn't sleep. She sat by the small fire in her tent. Holding her son, she whispered softly to him, "We might be safe for now, my little one. Maybe God has sent us an angel in this strange land." Outside, unseen by her, the chief walked quietly past her tent. He stopped for a moment, listening to the faint murmur of her voice. His heart ached with memories of his lost family. The sound of the baby's soft cooing filled the air, reminding him of a time before blood and war. The days turned into a slow rhythm. Sarah began to understand a few words of their language. The Comanche women, especially an older one named Running Fawn, started to teach her simple tasks: grinding corn, weaving baskets, and cooking by the fire. In return, Sarah helped care for the children when the men went hunting. One afternoon, as the chief prepared to ride out for a scouting trip, Sarah stepped forward nervously, holding out a piece of leather she had stitched with simple beads. It was her first attempt at Comanche craftwork. "For you," she said softly. Her voice trembled. "To thank you for helping me." Tallhawk took the leather piece in his hands, looking at the clumsy but sincere work. The beads were uneven, but he saw care in every stitch. "You learn fast," he said with a faint smile. "Keep your courage, woman," she smiled back shyly, not knowing what else to say, but in that brief exchange, something passed between them. A quiet respect, a bridge built over fear and loss. When Tallhawk and his men returned 3 days later, they brought back wild horses and fresh meat. The camp celebrated, but danger was close. Scouts reported that a group of white soldiers was seen moving near their lands. Searching for lost settlers that night, the council gathered again. Some argued that Sarah should be used as a message. "If her people come, they will bring death," said Gray Fox. "Better we send her away, or—" His words hung in the air. Before he could finish, Tallhawk raised his hand. "She stays," he said firmly. "No harm will come to her or the child." His tone left no room for argument. The firelight flickered on his face, showing both authority and quiet pain. Sarah, sitting inside her tent, didn't know about the meeting, but she felt the tension in the air. She held her baby close and whispered a prayer, not knowing that the man who had once captured her was now the one protecting her from his own people. As the night wind swept through the camp, carrying the scent of burning cedar, two very different souls, a warrior of the plains and a mother from another world, found themselves bound by something neither could fully explain, and though they didn't yet know it, their story was just beginning. The winds across the plains grew stronger as the days passed, carrying whispers of danger from beyond the hills. The Comanche tribe could feel it. The air was different, tense, filled with a kind of silence that comes before a storm. Sarah had begun to walk among the people with less fear now. She had learned a few words in their tongue, enough to thank the women who shared food or helped her with the baby. The child who once cried all night now laughed softly when the older children played nearby. The camp had accepted their presence, though not completely. Some still looked at her with suspicion, believing she was a sign of bad luck. One afternoon, while Sarah washed her clothes near the stream, she saw a group of riders returning. Dust rising behind them, at their lead was Chief Tallhawk. His expression was grave, and behind him, Gray Fox carried a piece of torn cloth, white fabric with blue stitching. Sarah's heart skipped. She knew that pattern. It belonged to the settlers' wagons that evening. The camp gathered around the main fire. Tallhawk stood before them, his presence calm but commanding. "The white soldiers are near," he said. "They search for lost settlers, and they will not stop until they find them." His gaze drifted toward Sarah's tent for a brief second. The crowd murmured, worry spreading among them like fire. Gray Fox stepped forward. "They bring death with their search," he said. "They have taken our lands, killed our brothers, and now they come again. The woman is the reason, Chief. If we hand her over, they might turn away." The camp fell silent, waiting for Tallhawk's answer. His eyes narrowed, not in anger but in deep thought. Finally, he said, "If we give her away, we become the same as those who burn our homes and take our children. We will not trade one life for another." His words cut through the murmurs. Firm and final, the decision was made, but the tension did not fade. Later that night, Sarah sat in her tent, her baby asleep beside her. She could sense the unease around her. Every shout outside made her flinch. Suddenly, she heard footsteps near the entrance. Her heart pounded, but it was running Fawn, the elderly woman who had shown her kindness. She entered quietly, holding a small bundle of food. "You must be ready," she whispered. "If danger comes, take the child and run to the old canyon path. It leads to the river." Sarah's eyes widened. "But what about you?" she asked. The old woman smiled sadly. "I have lived my life. You must protect his," she said, touching the baby's cheek before leaving the tent. Outside, under the moonlight, Chief Tallhawk stood alone, staring toward the horizon. He could see faint lights far away, torches moving in the distance. The soldiers were coming. Before dawn, the first gunshots echoed through the plains. The tribe woke in alarm. Warriors rushed to their horses. Women gathered the children. Smoke began to rise as bullets cut through the morning air. Sarah clutched her baby and crouched low in her tent. Her heart raced as chaos surrounded her. Suddenly, the tent flap opened and it was Tallhawk. His face was streaked with dirt and sweat. "Come," he said firmly. "You must move now." She hesitated. "The soldiers, they might think I'm one of you," she said. Trembling, the chief handed her a piece of torn white cloth. "Wave this if they see you, but go where I tell you," he said. "You'll find the canyon path behind the hill." Before she could thank him, a shout came from outside. Gray Fox appeared, his bow drawn. "Chief, there are too many," he yelled. "We must fall back." Tallhawk nodded, then turned to Sarah again. "Go now," he commanded. Sarah ran, her bare feet cutting against the rocky ground. She held the baby close, never looking back. The sound of battle echoed behind her, horses neighing, men shouting, bullets cracking through the air. When she reached the canyon, she turned for one last glance. From the ridge, she saw flames rising and figures clashing in the smoke. Her heart broke. She whispered a prayer for the people who had shown her mercy. Hours passed before she dared to stop. Exhausted, she sank beside the riverbank. Her baby whimpered softly and she kissed his forehead. "We're safe now," she whispered. Though her tears said otherwise, as the sun began to set again, the forest grew quiet. Suddenly she heard movement behind her. She turned quickly, ready to run, but froze when she saw a familiar figure limping toward her. Chief Tallhawk. His arm was wounded, blood staining his sleeve, but his eyes still burned with strength. He dropped to one knee, breathing heavily. "You made it," he said with effort. Sarah rushed to him, helping him sit. "You saved us," she said, "but the others?" He looked toward the smoke still visible in the distance. "They will rebuild," he said slowly, "but you must go farther. The soldiers will come this way soon." Tears filled her eyes. "Come with us," she pleaded. "You can't go back there. They'll kill you." He shook his head gently. "My people need me, even if they no longer understand me." His voice grew weaker. "But I needed to see the child safe before I return." For a long moment, neither spoke. The river moved quietly beside them. carrying away the ashes of battle. Sarah reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. "You're not like the others," she whispered. "You saved us when you had every reason not to." Tallhawk managed a faint smile. "Maybe the Great Spirit sent you to remind me that mercy is not weakness," he said. "Even a warrior can still have a heart." As night fell over the plains, Sarah watched him rise slowly and disappear into the shadows, heading back toward his people. The baby stirred and she held him close. Though she didn't know what the next day would bring, she would never forget the man who had shown her that compassion could exist even between enemies. And far away under the wide, endless sky, the chief whispered a prayer to the wind, a prayer for peace, for a mother, and for a child who had changed his soul. The sky was still red from the fire that had swallowed the Comanche camp. Smoke drifted across the plains like ghosts mourning the fallen. Sarah sat by the river, clutching her baby. Her hands trembled, her dress torn, her mind heavy with memories of the night before. She had escaped death, but her heart carried the weight of those she had left behind. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, the sound of horses echoed again. At first, Sarah froze, afraid it might be the warriors returning. But when the riders appeared through the mist, she saw blue uniforms, the soldiers. Her breath caught in her throat. "Over here," one of them shouted. The men galloped closer, rifles ready. Sarah waved the torn white cloth the chief had given her, shouting, "Don't shoot! Please, I'm one of you!" The soldiers surrounded her quickly. Their faces were hard, covered in dust. The leader, a tall man with gray hair and a scar across his chin, dismounted. "Name yourself," he said sternly. "My name is Sarah Miller," she answered, her voice shaking. "I was taken months ago by the Comanche." The captain narrowed his eyes. "You survived that long among them?" he asked, suspicious. "And you carry a child?" Sarah nodded. "My son, he was born before they captured us," she said softly, holding the baby tighter. The captain exchanged glances with his men. "We'll take you back to Fort Williams," he said finally. "But you'll have to answer questions." As they rode back toward the fort, Sarah kept silent. Her thoughts were with Chief Tallhawk, the man who had saved her, the man the soldiers called an enemy. When they reached the fort, people gathered to see her. Some gasped, others whispered, "It's the lost woman. She's alive." Doctors took her inside, giving her food and water, but their kindness felt cold, filled with curiosity more than care. Later that evening, Captain Reeves came to speak with her again. "You've been through much," he said. "But now we need to know what you saw. Where's their camp? How many warriors? What weapons do they have?" Sarah's heart sank. "You want to go after them again?" she asked quietly. The captain's expression didn't change. "They attacked settlers and killed soldiers. We'll wipe them out before they strike again." She shook her head, tears forming. "They didn't all fight," she said. "Their families, women, children." He slammed his fist on the table. "They're savages," he barked. "Don't tell me about their families." "Every one of them is a threat," Sarah flinched, her arms wrapping protectively around her child. She realized then that mercy had no place here. The same mercy she had received from Chief Tallhawk was nowhere to be found among her own. That night she couldn't sleep. The fort was quiet except for the crackling of torches and the sound of boots pacing outside. She stared at her baby's face, his tiny hands curled around her finger. "You'll grow up between two worlds," she whispered. "But I'll make sure you know which one showed us kindness." 2 days later, she overheard the soldiers preparing for another campaign. "We tracked the survivors east of the canyon," a young scout said. "The chief himself is wounded but still alive." Sarah's heart jumped. "Alive," she whispered, relief mixed with fear, because she knew what would come next. The army was going after him. That night, as the fort slept, Sarah made her decision. She wrapped her baby tightly, packed a small pouch of bread, and slipped out through the back gate. The guards were too busy drinking to notice the thin woman moving through the shadows. The journey was long and cold. The stars above seemed endless. Guiding her back toward the land she had fled, every step hurt. But her heart pulled her forward. By dawn, she reached the edge of the burned plains. The air smelled of ashes and blood. She followed the faint trail of hoofprints until she found what she prayed for, a group of wounded Comanche hidden among the rocks. They raised their bows when they saw her. One shouted, "White woman!" Before they could attack, a familiar voice called weakly, "Wait." Tallhawk emerged from behind the rocks, his arm wrapped in cloth, his face pale but still proud. Sarah ran to him, tears streaming down her cheeks. You're alive, she said breathlessly. He nodded slowly, his eyes soft. I told you the wind still carries me, he said with a faint smile. She knelt beside him. The soldiers are coming, she warned. You must move and they won't spare anyone. He looked toward the horizon, where dust clouds already rose. They will come, yes, he said quietly. But we are tired of running. Sarah shook her head. You can't fight them, not like this. There are too many. Tallhawk's gaze met hers. Then help us, he said. Your people will listen to you. Tell them we seek peace. Tell them we only wish to live, she hesitated, knowing how the captain had spoken. They won't listen, she whispered. They see only enemies. Then make them see the truth, he said, his hand gripping hers. You carry their blood and ours. Only you can stand between us. His words cut through her fear. She realized he was right. She had become the bridge between two worlds. The one he had spared now carried the power to spare his people. Sarah looked at him one last time. I'll try, she said. I promise, as she turned back toward the fort. Her heart pounded. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a witness to mercy that both sides had forgotten. By the time she reached the fort again, the soldiers were already preparing to ride. The captain saw her and frowned. Where have you been? Sarah lifted her chin, her voice steady. I've been to the other side, she said. And they're not monsters, they're people who want peace. The men laughed. But Captain Reeves didn't. He stared at her, then said coldly, Step aside, Mrs. Miller, this isn't your fight. But Sarah didn't move. It became my fight the moment your enemy saved my life, she said. Her voice trembling but firm. Silence fell, and in that silence, the line between mercy and betrayal began to blur. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the plains. The battle that would decide more than land was coming. It would test hearts, loyalties, and the meaning of humanity itself. The morning sun rose heavy and red, painting the plains with the color of blood. Soldiers at Fort Williams were already mounting their horses, rifles slung across their backs. The sound of metal clinking and horses neighing filled the air. The army was preparing to move, and Sarah stood in the middle of it all. Clutching her child close, Captain Reeves barked orders. His voice sharp. We ride within the hour. No mercy, no delays, he said. The men cheered, eager for revenge. Their faces were hard, their hearts colder than the barrels of their guns. Sarah stepped forward. Captain, please, she began. You can't attack them. They're hurt, half-starved. They have women and children. They only want peace. The captain turned toward her, his eyes narrowing. Peace? He repeated. They burned settlements, they killed our men, and you expect me to believe they want peace? They spared me, Sarah said firmly. Your enemies showed me kindness when they could have killed me. The chief, he saved my child, he saved me. A murmur spread among the soldiers. Disbelief mixed with unease, Reeves scoffed. You've been with them too long, he said. They've poisoned your mind. You forget who you are. Sarah's voice trembled but didn't break. No, Captain, I remember exactly who I am. I'm a woman who saw mercy in a place you said had none. Reeves's jaw tightened. Enough, he snapped. Take her to the medic tent. Keep her there until we return. Two soldiers moved to grab her. But Sarah stepped back, clutching the baby tighter. You can kill them, she said, but you'll never kill the truth. Reeves glared at her. The truth won't stop bullets, he said coldly and turned away. As the soldiers rode out, Sarah felt a deep ache in her chest. She couldn't let this happen, not after everything the chief had done. Without thinking further, she slipped out through the fort's side gate again, heading toward the open plains. Hours passed under the burning sun. Her feet blistered, her lips dry, but she kept walking. The child whimpered softly, and she whispered, Hold on, little one. We're going to stop them. Far ahead, she could see the cloud of dust rising. The army moving fast, she took a shortcut through the ravine she remembered from before, hoping to reach the Comanche before the soldiers did. Meanwhile, the remnants of the Comanche tribe had gathered among the rocks. Chief Tallhawk sat beside a small fire, his wound bound but bleeding through the cloth. Around him, only a few warriors remained. Tired and ready to face their fate, Gray Fox approached him. The soldiers come, he said quietly. We cannot fight them this time. Tallhawk nodded slowly. Then we will stand, he said. If this is our last sunrise, we will meet it with honor. Just then, one of the young lookouts cried out, Someone's coming! The warriors turned their bows toward the ridge. For a tense moment, all they saw was movement in the distance. Then out of the heat haze, Sarah appeared, stumbling. Holding her child, Gray Fox frowned. "The white woman," he said. "Why does she return now?" Tallhawk rose weakly, leaning on his spear. "Because she has the heart of a warrior," he said softly. Sarah reached them, breathless. "The soldiers are close," she gasped. "You have to leave now, please." "There's still time," Tallhawk shook his head. "There is no running from a storm that follows the wind," he said. "We will face it." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Then let me stand with you," she said. He looked at her, surprised. "You would stand between your people and mine?" She nodded. "If that's what it takes to stop this blood." "Yes." Moments later, the thunder of hooves echoed through the valley. The soldiers appeared on the ridge, rifles gleaming under the sunlight. Captain Reeves rode at the front, his expression cold and fixed. "Comanche," he shouted, "lay down your weapons." Tallhawk stepped forward, raising his empty hands. "We do not fight," he called back. "We want no war." Reeves sneered. "Lies," he said, raising his rifle. "This ends today." But before he could give the order to fire, Sarah ran into the open space between the two groups, waving her arms. "Stop!" she screamed. "Stop! There are children here." The soldiers froze for a moment, confused. Reeves shouted, "Sarah, get back! You'll get yourself killed." She didn't move. "Then you'll have to shoot through me first," she cried, "because I won't let you murder innocent people." The wind howled through the canyon, dust swirling around her feet. The chief stood behind her, silent, watching the courage he had once seen in her eyes grow even brighter. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. The soldiers' fingers tightened on their triggers. The warriors gripped their spears. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then the baby began to cry, a soft sound that broke through the silence like a prayer. The men hesitated, lowering their rifles slightly. Tallhawk stepped forward slowly and placed his hand on Sarah's shoulder. "This child cries for peace," he said, his deep voice carrying across the field. "Are you men enough to listen?" The captain's jaw clenched, his rifle still raised. But his eyes shifted to the crying baby and the woman standing before him. Something in him faltered. The soldiers looked uncertain. At last Reeves lowered his weapon. "Hold your fire," he said quietly. Sarah fell to her knees, tears of relief streaming down her face. The chief looked at her and nodded slowly. "You did what no warrior could," he said. "You fought without hate." The soldiers began to retreat, and the Comanche slowly stepped back toward their camp. The battle that should have ended in blood ended in silence. That evening, when the sun sank behind the hills, Sarah sat beside the chief, watching the sky turn gold. "Maybe the war is over," she whispered. Tallhawk looked at her and said, "No, the war never ends. But sometimes the heart wins a battle." The baby laughed softly, the sound echoing like hope across the quiet plains. And for the first time, both sides knew that something had changed. One act of courage had rewritten what hatred had tried to destroy. The sun dipped low behind the endless plains, casting long golden shadows over the valley. The air was still heavy with tension, though the guns had fallen silent. The army had withdrawn for the night, leaving behind an uneasy calm between two worlds that had nearly destroyed each other. Sarah sat beside Chief Tallhawk near the dying campfire. The baby slept peacefully in her arms. The chief's wound had reopened during the confrontation, and she carefully tightened the cloth around his arm. "You should rest," she whispered. He smiled faintly, his voice weak but steady. "A warrior rests when the spirits tell him his work is done," he said. "And mine is not done yet." Her eyes filled with tears. "You saved me when I was your enemy," she said softly. "And today, I only returned what you gave me. Mercy." Tallhawk looked toward the stars beginning to appear above them. "You carry a brave heart," he said. "One day, your child will know that courage can speak louder than war." In the distance, faint torches flickered. The army's campfire glow against the horizon. Captain Reeves sat outside his tent. Staring into the flames, his men were silent, unsure whether to celebrate or question what had just happened. One of the lieutenants, a young man named Harris, approached cautiously. "Sir, we let them go," he said. "Headquarters won't like that. They'll call it a failure." Reeves didn't look up. "Maybe," he said slowly, "but I've seen enough death to know what victory costs." "But sir," Harris argued, "they're the enemy." Reeves finally looked at him, his eyes dark. I looked into the eyes of that chief. He didn't look like an enemy. He looked like a man who's buried too many of his own. Harris fell silent. realizing there was no answer to that. The next morning, Sarah woke to the sound of the wind rustling through the tall grass. The Comanche women were already packing their few belongings, preparing to move before the soldiers changed their minds. Tallhawk stood at the edge of the camp, his shoulders squared though pain showed in his eyes. "Where will you go?" she asked, approaching him. "South," he said. "To the river valleys where the soldiers seldom ride. My people will heal there." Sarah hesitated. "And you?" He smiled faintly. "A chief's place is with his people," he said. "Even when his heart wishes to stay where peace was found." Her eyes lowered. Understanding his words, the bond between them had grown beyond the barriers of race, language, or war. It was built on gratitude, trust, and something deeper that neither dared to name before leaving. Tallhawk handed her a small leather charm carved with a hawk's feather. "For your child," he said. "It will remind him that courage has wings." Sarah took it, holding it tightly in her hand. "And for you," she said, untying the blue ribbon from her own hair and handing it to him. "To remember that even from the other side someone believed in you." He nodded, his eyes soft. "I will remember," he said. "Always." As the Comanche began to move south, Sarah watched them disappear into the horizon. She felt both grief and gratitude. She had seen two sides of humanity, cruelty and compassion, and now she carried the weight of both. When she returned to the fort later that afternoon, the atmosphere was cold. The soldiers avoided her eyes. Whispers followed her every step. Captain Reeves called her into his tent. "You risked everything," he said, "disobeyed orders. Endangered yourself and that child." Sarah met his gaze calmly. "And saved lives," she replied. Reeves sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. "The higher command will want reports. They'll call you a traitor for standing with the enemy." She smiled sadly. "Then let them. I stood for what was right." The captain studied her quietly, then said, "You remind me of my wife." Sarah blinked in surprise. Reeves continued, "She used to say mercy is a soldier's hardest battle. I never understood it until now outside." The men prepared to break camp. Orders had come for the army to move east. Away from the valley, Reeves turned to Harris and said, "We're leaving this land in peace. If anyone asks, there was no battle here. No blood spilled." As the troops rode away, Sarah watched them disappear just as she had watched the chief's people. Two different worlds retreating in opposite directions. Both scarred, both changed. Days turned into weeks, and life slowly returned to the plains. Grass grew where fire had once burned. The river flowed clear again, washing away the ash of war. Sarah built a small cabin near the edge of the forest, raising her child with stories not of hatred, but of bravery and forgiveness. Sometimes, on quiet nights, she thought she heard drums in the distance, the heartbeat of the land itself, reminding her of the people who had once called it home. Years passed, and her son grew strong and kind. He often asked about the feather charm hanging by his bed. "Who gave this to me?" he asked one evening. Sarah smiled softly. "A great chief," she said. "A man who taught me that kindness can live even in the heart of battle." The boy looked at her curiously. "Was he your friend?" She looked out toward the setting sun and whispered, "He was more than that. He was the reason we're still here, far away." Deep in the southern plains, Chief Tallhawk stood on a hill, watching his people rebuild their lives. In his hand he held a faded blue ribbon worn by time. He looked toward the northern sky and whispered, "May the wind carry her peace as it carried her courage." And as the wind swept across the endless grasslands, it carried the memories of two souls, a warrior and a mother, whose hearts had once met in the fire of conflict and found something stronger than fear. The wind blew softly through the tall grass of the open plains, carrying with it the scent of earth and wild sage. The land was peaceful again, healed by time, but it still whispered the echoes of battles long past. Sarah's cabin stood alone at the edge of the forest, surrounded by the same endless fields where her story had once unfolded. Years had passed since that fateful day. Her son, Daniel, had grown into a strong young man with calm eyes and a heart full of curiosity. His dark hair gleamed under the sun, and around his neck hung the small leather charm carved with a hawk's feather, a gift from the man his mother never stopped speaking about. Every evening as the fire crackled inside their home, Sarah told him the stories, not of soldiers or victories, but of Chief Tallhawk, of courage, of mercy that defied hatred. Daniel listened closely, his eyes bright. "He sounds like a great man," he would say. Sarah would smile softly. He was more than great, she'd reply. He was noble, even when the world refused to see it. By the time Daniel turned 20, Sarah had grown older and weaker. The years of hardship had left her body frail, though her spirit remained strong. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and rose, she called Daniel to her bedside. "Daniel," she said, her voice trembling but warm, "there's something I need to tell you." He took her hand gently. "I'm listening, Mother." She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "The chief, the one who saved us, he's real. He wasn't just a story to make you brave. He lived, and he may still live far to the south. I always wanted to thank him again, but the world separated us." Daniel frowned slightly. "You never went back?" She shook her head slowly. "No, but you can," she whispered. "You carry both his courage and mine. The time has come for you to find him, or what remains of him, and tell him, we never forgot." Tears stung his eyes. "Mother, you're tired. Rest now," he said gently. She smiled through her pain. "Promise me, Daniel." He nodded. "I promise." A few weeks later, Sarah passed away peacefully, the feather charm resting on her chest. Daniel buried her beneath the oak tree near their cabin, where she used to sit and tell her stories. For days he sat beside her grave, feeling the silence of the plains settle into his heart. Then one morning as dawn broke, Daniel saddled his horse, tied the charm around his neck, and began his journey south. The same path his mother had once taken through danger and destiny. Days turned into weeks as he crossed rivers and hills, following the old trails of the Comanche. He met traders, hunters, and travelers who spoke of scattered tribes living deep beyond the southern valleys. Some said the old chief still lived, a wise man who rarely spoke. Others claimed he had become a spirit watching over his people. One evening, Daniel reached a small Comanche settlement by the river. The people looked at him with caution, but one elderly woman stepped forward. Her hair was silver, her eyes kind yet sharp. "You do not belong here," she said. "But your eyes are not strangers." Daniel bowed his head respectfully. "My name is Daniel Miller," he said. "My mother was Sarah, a woman who once lived among your people. Chief Tallhawk saved her life many years ago." The old woman's expression changed. "Tallhawk," she whispered. "Yes, I knew him. He was our chief. He led us through fire and sorrow, but few speak his name now. He lives alone, up in the sacred canyon." Daniel's heart raced. "Can you take me to him?" The woman shook her head. "The path is not easy, but follow the river until the rocks turn red. You will find his fire still burning." Daniel thanked her and set out before dawn. The path was rough, the cliffs high, and the air grew thin. But he didn't stop, driven by his mother's last wish and the feeling that destiny was guiding him forward. At sunset, he reached the canyon. The walls glowed crimson in the fading light. And there, by a small fire beneath a lone tree, sat an old man wrapped in a deerskin cloak. His hair was white, his back slightly bent, but his presence was still powerful. Daniel dismounted slowly, approaching with respect. The man looked up, his deep eyes still sharp despite the years. "You carry her eyes," he said quietly before Daniel could even speak. Daniel froze. You knew my mother?" Tallhawk nodded slowly. "I knew her heart before I knew her name," he said, "and I see it lives on in you." Daniel knelt beside him, tears forming in his eyes. "She never forgot you," he said, his voice breaking. "She told me everything. She wanted me to find you, to thank you." The old chief smiled faintly. "I needed no thanks," he said. "Her courage repaid every kindness." Daniel reached into his pouch and took out the blue ribbon, old but carefully preserved. "She kept this all her life," he said, handing it to him. Tallhawk's hands trembled as he held the ribbon, memories flooding back. "The sky was blue that day," he murmured, "and her tears were the color of rain." The two sat in silence for a long while, the fire crackling softly between them. The chief finally spoke again. She said her child would walk between two worlds. She was right. You stand where war once lived and bring peace where hearts once broke. Daniel bowed his head. I didn't come for peace. I came for truth, he said. And I found it in your eyes. The chief smiled, his voice low. Then my spirit can rest, for her story will live through you. That night, under a sky full of stars, Daniel stayed beside the old chief, listening to the stories of his people, stories of courage, loss, and love beyond boundaries. And as the fire burned low, Daniel realized that his mother's journey had never truly ended. It had only passed into his hands to carry forward the legacy of two hearts that had dared to bridge a world divided by fear. The night sky above the canyon shimmered with 1,000 stars. The fire between Daniel and Chief Tallhawk burned low, its glow flickering gently against the red stone walls. A cold wind whispered through the valley, carrying the scent of smoke, earth, and memory. The young man and the old chief sat in silence, bound not by words but by something deeper, destiny. Daniel watched the chief's weathered face in the dim light. Each line told a story of war, loss, and wisdom earned through pain. You lived through so much, Daniel said softly. How did you keep going when everything was taken from you? Tallhawk looked at the flames for a long time before answering. When you lose everything, he said slowly, the earth becomes your teacher, the sun still rises, the river still flows. Life does not stop for grief, so neither should a man. Daniel nodded, his eyes filled with respect. My mother said something like that too, he whispered. She said peace isn't the end of war. It's the courage to forgive. The old chief smiled faintly. Your mother had the heart of a warrior, he said. She faced men with guns and chose mercy instead of hate. That kind of strength changes the world. They sat together for hours sharing stories. Daniel spoke of the farm, of his mother's life after the war, of how she taught him never to see color as a line, but as part of the same sky. The chief listened, his eyes distant, his thoughts drifting between past and present. As dawn broke, the first light touched the canyon walls, painting them gold. Tallhawk stood slowly, his body weak, but his spirit still proud. He walked to the edge of the cliff and looked out at the wide plains stretching endlessly before him. This land remembers everything, he said. Every cry, every tear, every promise. Daniel joined him. Then let it remember peace too, he said quietly. Tallhawk nodded. It will, because of your mother, he said. And now, because of you. They descended back to the fire where the chief took a small pouch made of soft leather. He placed it in Daniel's hands. These are my people's stories, he said. Our songs, our prayers, our truths. Take them, protect them. The world forgets easily, but if even one heart remembers, then we do not die. Daniel held the pouch tightly. I promise, he said. I'll keep your stories alive. The chief smiled, his voice barely above a whisper. That is all I ask. Hours later, the wind grew stronger and dark clouds rolled across the sky. A storm was coming. The old chief seemed to feel it in his bones. It is time, he murmured, sitting by the fire again. Daniel knelt beside him, worried. You need rest, he said. Tallhawk's gaze turned upward, his eyes reflecting the sky. I am not dying, he said softly. I am returning, to the wind, to the earth, to the spirits who called me long ago. Daniel's throat tightened. Don't say that, he whispered. You're still needed. The chief placed a trembling hand on his shoulder. No, my son. The world belongs to the living now. You are the bridge. Walk both paths, but belong to neither. That is your gift, and your burden. A tear rolled down Daniel's cheek. I won't forget, he said, his voice breaking. The chief smiled faintly. Then my story is safe, he whispered. As the storm broke overhead, lightning flashed across the canyon. The wind howled through the rocks. The fire flickered and went out. Daniel covered the chief with his cloak, but the old warrior was still. His breath slowed, his eyes closing gently as the thunder echoed through the valley. Tallhawk's lips moved one last time, his voice almost carried away by the wind. "Tell her I kept the sky blue," he whispered. And then he was gone. Daniel bowed his head, weeping quietly. The rain began to fall, washing the dust from the chief's face. It was as if the heavens themselves mourned a hero. When the storm passed, Daniel built a cairn of stones at the edge of the canyon, marking the chief's resting place. He placed the blue ribbon atop it, fluttering gently in the wind. "This belongs here," he whispered, "with the man who gave it meaning." For days, Daniel stayed near the canyon, writing down everything he had learned, every story, every word, every lesson. He carved symbols into the rock, the mark of a hawk, and the outline of a mother holding her child, side by side. When he finally returned north, he carried more than a pouch of memories. He carried a legacy at home. He rebuilt the small cabin and turned it into a place of peace. Travelers, settlers, and native families often came there seeking rest. And Daniel would tell them the story. He spoke not of war, but of a chief who showed mercy and a mother who chose peace. He told them how two hearts, divided by blood and nation, proved that compassion was stronger than hatred, stronger even than time itself years later. When Daniel himself grew old, the valley became known as Hawk's Crossing, a place where no one was turned away, where a feather and a blue ribbon still hung above the door. Fluttering side by side, children would gather around him by the fire, and he'd smile, saying, "Long ago, before your fathers were born, a warrior and a woman met not as enemies, but as souls who understood the truth, that love and mercy belong to everyone." And as his voice faded into the night, the wind would rise gently, swirling around the fire. Some said it carried the spirit of Chief Tallhawk, watching over them still. The plains remained quiet under the eternal sky, where the stories of both the Comanche chief and the captured woman lived forever, written not in books or stone, but in the hearts of all who heard their tale, because legends never die. They simply change their shape, becoming whispers in the wind, songs in the firelight, and courage in the hearts of those who dare to forgive.